What is it about ancient wisdom that still draws us in, thousands of years later? Why do symbols like light and darkness, life and death, balance and chaos keep surfacing in art, philosophy, and religion across all of history? If we could look deeper, beyond these symbols and their traditional meanings, what might we uncover about how to understand the world and our place in it? There's something mysterious in how these symbols repeat, as though pointing to universal truths that lie beyond individual cultures. Could there be a hidden logic, an underlying pattern in the way ancient symbols are structured that brings them to life again and again in new forms? And if such a pattern exists, what might it reveal about the nature of human understanding itself? Here's a question worth pondering. What if there were a way to decode these symbols, revealing universal principles that transcend any single tradition? Imagine finding a common structure in symbols from cultures as varied as ancient Egypt, classical Greece, and early Buddhism. What could these connections tell us about the nature of human experience? And could they offer insights that still resonate with the challenges we face today? The answer may lie in triads, sets of 3 interrelated elements that balance both harmony and tension. Examining symbols through this triadic lens, we don't just learn about a single concept in isolation. We see how it relates dynamically to others. For instance, life, death, and rebirth form a triad reflecting a cycle that appears across the world's spiritual traditions, highlighting how endings connect to new beginnings in a way that speaks to a shared human understanding. As we explore, keep these questions in mind. How do patterns across cultures reveal universal truths? How do we balance the specific meanings of each tradition with insights that seem to transcend them? And what might these ancient patterns teach us about the complex, interconnected world we live in today? By the end, we hope you'll see that these symbols and patterns are not just relics of the past, but hold timeless wisdom. This approach reveals ancient teachings not only as reflections of their time, but as encoded insights into the enduring human condition, offering valuable guidance if we're prepared to see the logical structures that hold them together. Let's begin with a fundamental question. What exactly is a pattern? And how can we recognize it in a way that consistently reveals meaning across different traditions? In this model, pattern recognition isn't merely about identifying recurring symbols. Instead, it involves organizing them into triads, 3 interconnected elements where the relationships between them reveal deeper structural meanings. Many ancient symbols are not isolated. They exist within networks that reflect larger underlying principles. By viewing these symbols as part of a triadic framework, we can uncover how complex ideas are interconnected. Imagine encountering core symbols from Indian philosophy: dharma, which means ethical duty; karma, which refers to action and consequence; and samsara, the cycle of rebirth. At first, these may seem like standalone concepts, but when we view them in a logical triad, their interconnected relationships reveal a more dynamic system. Dharma leads to karma. By following one's ethical duty or dharma actions or karma align with cosmic law, leading to favorable outcomes. Karma leads to samsara. Karma, in turn, directly affects samsara, determining the nature of one's rebirth and thus influencing the cycle itself. Samsara leads to dharma. Finally, the condition of one's existence within samsara influences one's ability to perceive and fulfill dharma, completing a cycle of reciprocal influences. In this triad, dharma, karma, and samsara are not simply concepts but elements in a cycle of ethical and existential balance. This structure reflects a recurring theme in Indian philosophy: the continuous loop of cause, action, and effect. To understand these principles further, we can search for structural equivalents in other cultural contexts. Consider the relationship between moral law, a form of ethical order, consequences resulting from actions, and transformation, or a cycle of change, which are often found in different forms across cultures. In ancient Greek thought, for example, one's moral actions lead to consequences that shape the soul's progression or state of being. Think about this for a moment. How does identifying these structural patterns help us move beyond cultural specifics to reveal universal foundations? By mapping concepts like dharma, karma, and samsara as structural triads, we see that different traditions, though culturally unique, may reflect similar logical relationships. This process of recognizing structural equivalence allows us to draw connections, offering insights into recurring ethical and existential themes across cultures. Through triadic pattern recognition, we uncover a structured network of relationships, enabling us to view ancient wisdom as a series of interconnected principles. By seeing beyond the symbols themselves, we reveal a shared logical foundation that resonates across traditions, offering insights that remain relevant to the human condition. Once we recognize patterns in symbolic structures, a vital question emerges. How do we ensure that our interpretations respect the original context and intent of each tradition? Here we move from simple pattern recognition to contextual analysis, where triads serve as boundary conditions. These boundaries act as guardrails that preserve the relationships significant to each tradition, ensuring that each symbol or triad retains its unique role and meaning. Next, we explore how each triad operates within its specific cultural, historical, or linguistic context, which allows us to clarify its unique significance and understand the relationships between the elements. For example, in Greek philosophy, virtue, wisdom, and happiness form a triad central to Greek ethics. Here, wisdom is seen as a necessary condition for achieving happiness through virtue. This triadic structure reflects an ideal of personal moral development, where the emphasis is on cultivating internal qualities rather than performing external rituals. Now consider this question. How would this triad differ in a tradition that values collective harmony over individual flourishing? In Confucian thought, for instance, a triadic structure might include virtue, social harmony, and prosperity, where the emphasis lies on how virtue fosters community relationships rather than individual happiness. Each triad has boundary conditions that shape its meaning within its cultural framework, ensuring the concept of virtue adapts to fit values unique to each tradition. We can also consider how different worldviews shape boundary conditions around concepts of life and death. In ancient Egyptian thought, life, death, and the afterlife form a triad emphasizing continuity and immortality, where death is a passage rather than a final end. By contrast, for ancient Greeks, death often symbolized a final boundary, marking the separation between the mortal world and the realm of the gods. In each culture, life, death, and continuity are bounded by specific beliefs and practices that make these concepts uniquely relevant. To broaden our understanding, we can validate these boundary relationships by comparing similar triads across various traditions. The Greek triad of virtue, wisdom, happiness, for instance, can be contrasted with Confucian values where personal happiness may be replaced by social harmony as the goal of virtuous behavior. This comparison highlights that while different cultures may use similar structural elements, each one applies them uniquely, rooted in distinct values and beliefs. Consider this. How does applying these boundary conditions help us avoid oversimplification or distortion? By respecting each tradition's triadic constraints, we ground interpretations in the relationships and values meaningful to each culture. This approach prevents us from imposing an external interpretation that might overlook essential elements of the original context, allowing for a clear and accurate portrayal of each worldview. Ultimately, contextual triads serve as essential boundary conditions, preserving the original intent and meaning of symbols while enabling logical analysis. They act as a lens through which each culture's specific worldview is maintained and respected. Rather than reducing symbols to universal meanings, this approach acknowledges and honors their unique roles, creating a rich, faithful representation of each tradition's insights. Once we've recognized patterns and honored each tradition's unique context, we arrive at the question of how to apply these insights in ways that make them relevant and useful. We can approach this application in two primary ways. First, we can interpret the triadic relationships directly, drawing out the wisdom embedded within them. Second, we can use the principle of correspondence, the idea that understanding the structure of a pattern in one context can illuminate similar patterns in another. This dual approach allows us to benefit from both the specific teachings of each triad and the universal logic they reveal. The first way we can apply these insights is by interpreting the triadic relationships in myths, stories, and symbols. By identifying and analyzing the triads embedded within them, we begin to understand how different concepts are logically interrelated and how they convey meaningful lessons through their structure. For example, let's consider the triad of creation, destruction, and renewal, a recurring theme in mythology and spirituality. In Hinduism, this triad is represented by Brahma, creation, Shiva, destruction, and Vishnu, preservation or renewal. By analyzing these relationships, we can see how they emphasize that destruction is not simply an end, but a necessary process for renewal. Each element in the triad holds its role within a balanced cycle, showing that growth and change depend upon a dynamic tension between forces. Ask yourself, how might this triad apply to real-life cycles of change, personal growth, or societal transformation? By interpreting this triadic relationship, we gain an understanding of how the ideas of creation and destruction interact logically, leading us to see renewal as a predictable outcome of life's processes. This direct interpretation not only preserves the original teaching, but also provides us with a coherent model to understand similar relationships in our own lives. The second approach, correspondence, takes these triadic insights one step further by recognizing that patterns often hold across different scales or domains, a principle famously phrased as above, so below. With a deeper understanding of how a triadic structure functions in one context, we can apply that logic to other objects or systems that follow a similar pattern. For instance, let's return to the triad of dharma, karma, and samsara. This triad is specific to Indian philosophy, yet the structure of duty, consequence, and cycle can appear in other contexts, such as ethics or environmental stewardship. In both contexts, duty or principle shapes actions, which in turn influence an ongoing cycle. By understanding these interactions, we gain a framework that we can apply to other systems where actions and principles affect long-term outcomes. Consider the triad of balance, sustainability, and regeneration in ecological systems. Balance serves as a guiding principle. Sustainability arises from balanced actions that respect natural laws. Regeneration reflects the ongoing cycle of growth, decay, and renewal in ecosystems. By applying the triadic insights from Indian philosophy to ecology, we see that a sustainable system must consider the balance of its actions in order to maintain the cycle of regeneration. In this way, correspondence allows us to take principles learned from one triad and apply them to similar patterns across different domains, whether in ethics, relationships, or even broader systems like ecology. Through direct interpretation and correspondence, we can apply the wisdom contained in ancient triadic structures in two ways. First, by understanding the relationships and teachings specific to each triad, and second, by using this knowledge as a model for interpreting other systems that follow similar patterns. This approach not only respects the cultural origins of each triad, but also allows us to see them as part of a greater interconnected framework of insight. Ultimately, these applications help us to bridge the gap between ancient wisdom and contemporary challenges, using a structured, logical approach that transcends time and place. Triadic analysis thus offers a timeless framework, helping us to make sense of complex, interrelated concepts across both the personal and universal scales. As we conclude, you might be wondering how to start applying this approach in your own exploration of ancient wisdom, stories, or even contemporary issues. The process begins simply. Start by identifying recurring symbols or themes, whether in texts, myths, or life experiences, and examine them for triadic relationships. Notice how elements are not isolated, but often work in sets of three, where each part plays a role in balance, tension, or completion. Ask yourself, what are the relationships between these elements? Do they coexist, reinforce, or create a sequence of cause and effect? With practice, you'll start to see how these triads offer deeper insights. They reveal a structure and logic that connect individual parts to a whole, whether you're analyzing myths, ethical dilemmas, or even natural cycles. Once you've explored direct interpretations, try applying correspondence, looking at how the patterns you uncover in one context might relate to another. This practice will allow you to see universal structures at work, from personal growth to societal systems, showing how ancient logic offers a fresh lens on modern challenges. We hope you're inspired to start recognizing and interpreting these triadic structures, and we invite you to join us again as we delve deeper. On our channel, we explain our methods for analyzing ancient texts to extract hidden wisdom and apply those methods, revealing ancient insights. Please subscribe and come back often to learn how ancient wisdom resonates with our lives in ways that are both timeless and profound. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you again soon on this journey of discovery.